Hey folks, thanks for joining. I'm Rick Buck. I'm Chief Privacy Officer at WireWheel, and thank you for joining our weekly privacy roll-up. We've been doing the privacy roll-up for a couple months now, and we've been getting great feedback from the folks that have been joining us. And we're trying something a little new today. Today, rather than having a pre-recorded one, we're live on LinkedIn. So thanks for joining us on our inaugural event, and hope it all goes well. Today's topic, we are going to talk about the report that was issued last week from our friends at IAPP and Ernst & Young on the privacy governance report. They are, and I'm sure many of you have looked at it, are familiar that it's come out. This year's report is addressing topics like the impact of COVID on businesses and the privacy industry, the compliance issues tied to state and global and international laws, the organizational architecture of privacy organizations, what that means from a leadership point of view, reporting structures and budgets, the team responsibilities and how those responsibilities and priorities have been shifting. What are the benchmarks that they're using to measure their successes? What are workflows and challenges around subject requests? How are they managing downstream vendors, and a number of other topics. The report was the survey was a result of getting information from approximately 473 different people in the privacy industry, and a little bit about them. 80% of them worked for a firm headquarters in the United States, UK, or Europe. 23% of them came from, as you might expect, technology, telecom, and software. The next biggest group was finance and insurance. And then the rest of the usual suspects, healthcare, pharma, government, energy, education, academia, media, et cetera, made up the rest of the pack. It was a pretty even distribution between size of company, large, medium, and small. The majority of the people that responded were either data protection officers, chief privacy officers, or privacy managers. Other titles included privacy officers, directors of privacy, and a number of other variations on that theme. Almost 70% of the people, now granted it was an IAPP study, but almost 70% of the people had some sort of CIPP credential, most of which were CIPP-EY, CIPM, CIPP-US, shameless plug. I'm two of the three of those. From a gender point of view, it was split pretty evenly between male and female, and about 2% of the people that responded reported as non-binary. So a little bit of context about the report. Needless to say, 2021 has been an interesting year from a privacy perspective. On the national front, Luxembourg, the National Commission for Data Protection, hit Amazon with a fairly large fee, 746 million euro. It's the largest fine ever imposed on a company. That's not a done deal yet, but that's a pretty big signal. New legislation has come out around the globe. China has a new law. South Africa has a new law. Brazil's law came into effect. We had the Schrems decision, which questioned SCCs and instituted a new formality around transfer impact assessments. It invalidated the privacy shield. In the United States, we passed two state privacy laws. Excuse me, we passed three state privacy laws. One came into effect, CPRA, Virginia, Colorado coming into effect next year, but CPRA has a 2022 look back, so things to worry about for next year. We still don't have a baseline for federal legislation, so there's no homogenization around what the new state laws are going to be, and so lots of confusion there. And then on top of that, you have industry responding, companies like Apple and Google, who are introducing their own privacy-centric initiatives. So there's been lots to think about, and there's been a lot from the report point of view to ask questions about. So let's break that down, and it's a fairly lengthy report. I'm going to try to get through this in as little time as possible, but we need to think about some of these things. From a COVID point of view, the key takeaways are that only about 22% of companies are requiring vaccine passports or screening people to come back into the office. 80% or more of people are working from home or working hybrid, and they expect that to continue for next year. Travel is way down, and they don't expect travel to see any kind of uptick until 2022. More to come on that stuff. Lastly, while vaccines are required or passports are required, needless to say, that's a highly controversial subject, and lots of controversy and privacy implications around that. From a privacy and compliance point of view, complying with GDPR, CCPA, and other laws, the Schrems decision threw a huge monkey wrench into the way in which companies are challenged with privacy. Approximately 60% of the companies that surveyed are now relying on SECs as their legitimate means for cross-border transfers. Many of them are also relying on lots of other safeguards. Those are adequacy decisions, technical measures, contracts, policies, and of course, good old-fashioned consent. Interestingly, because of the invalidation of Privacy Shield and because of the SECs being called into question, about 10% of the companies that responded to the survey said that they were either localizing their data or halting data transfers altogether. So paradigm shift in the way that they're manipulating data. From a global law point of view, 51% of the companies interviewed said they were fully or partially compliant for GDPR. Only 41% said so about CCPA, and only 21% said so about LGPD. Some of that is biased a little bit by do they even need to comply with those laws? But needless to say, those are lower numbers than you might expect. And so there's some heavy lifting to be done by companies for compliance in those areas. On a privacy leadership point of view, increased reliance on customer data is making, and the amount of data that's being collected is making the importance of data and the importance of privacy and governance around that data increasingly more important. We're seeing privacy leaders serving more and more critical roles, and they're across multiple organizations. Most often, the survey respondents said that their privacy function sits within the legal team. And then, as you might expect, other places that they might live are directly with the CEO, the chief compliance officer, some to the board of directors, some to the CFO. So it's kind of scattered. In terms of the people who lead these teams, most often the title is the chief privacy officer or a data protection officer. And in the EU, the privacy leader is more likely to be their DPO. Privacy leaders, this was an interesting set of stats that came out of the report. Privacy leaders are frequently the same as or in an equivalent position to CPOs, DPOs, and CISOs. Yet, at the same time, privacy leaders tended to be more junior to CTOs, CIOs, and chief compliance officers. While they are increasing in their status, there's still room for improvement on where the privacy function exists organizationally. Data protection officers, 74% of the respondents said they have a DPO. 41% of those companies said they had one, 18% said they had multiple. And those of the 18% that had multiple, the overwhelming majority said that they had the multiple DPOs were placed in different jurisdictions on where they were doing business. Staffing and budgeting. So the short takeaway is that over the last couple of years, and last year in particular, we saw budgets increase, we saw staffing increase. The median privacy budget reported was $350,000, and most of the money that budgets were allocated, the budget allocations went towards salaries and travel, as you might expect. Other areas included outside counsel, technology tools, training, and consulting services. Budgeting is mostly made by general counsel or CPOs. This one I love. When asked if their budgets were sufficient, 63% of the respondents said that it was less than sufficient. 35% said it was sufficient. 4% said that it was more than they needed. The good news is that 60% of the respondents said they expected budgets to increase over the next 12 months, and an increase in budgets will be going to fund salaries and hiring new people, and potentially adding more consulting services. Ironically, to the companies who are expecting to see decreases in budgets, they're guessing that the impact there will impact their outside counsel and consulting. On priorities and reporting and benchmarking, 30% of the companies reported GDPR as the biggest their biggest responsibility and the thing that they are focused on. Interestingly, 12% said CPA, CPRA, the state laws were their biggest priority. 18% said compliance outside of the United States or EU was their priority. 15% said meeting the expectations of their clients and partners were their priority. And 10% said that safeguarding the business against threats and attacks were their biggest priority. Some of this skews based on whether you were Eurocentric or US-centric on what your compliance was. But interesting to see that state federal legislation is where people are most worried. From a metrics point of view, people were mapping to things like NIST and ISO as benchmarking platforms for the success of their programs. And the things that they are measuring in descending order were incident responses, privacy data protection impact assessments, training and awareness, DSAR metrics, etc. Interestingly, only 23% of the people that responded said they weren't doing any metrics at all. So definitely room to improve there. Let's see, what else is important in this report? Because there's been increased focus on downstream vendors, more and more companies are being more scrutinous of the work they're doing with their vendors, and are relying on contracts or certifications and multiple certifications of their vendors. So good to see that more and more companies are doing that. The key takeaways from the report, I would say, are a couple things. One, COVID's going to continue to be an impact on businesses in general and on privacy teams in particular, with many people continuing to work from home, slight shift in a hybrid model. The real takeaway is that the importance of privacy, the privacy function across organizations is escalating. We're seeing increases in staff, we're seeing increases in budgets. Most are projecting budgets to increase, very few are expecting budgets to decrease. Compliance with GDPR, CPRA, US state laws, international laws are people's primary focus. There's a lot of room for compliance. It's good to see that a lot of companies feel like they're prepared, but a lot of companies have some heavy lifting to do. Thank you, Schrems, too, by the way, for making SCCs and cross-border transfers people's overwhelmingly biggest worry. So those are some of the key takeaways. The report, I believe, is 190 pages, and I tried to cram all that into about 5-ish minutes. And so I expect that there is a lot more information to cover and questions that you may have about findings in the report. If you have questions about what I've just talked about or other privacy-related questions, feel free to email us at marketing@wirewheel.io. I really appreciate you all joining in our weekly privacy roll-up. I hope you'll join me again next week, and when we attack our next subject, and update you on the latest comings and goings in the world of privacy. I think that's it for this week. Thanks so much for joining in, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.